He found a starving Apache child 4 days later. 3 Apache women stood at his door. True Western John McAllister had always been a man of solitude. His ranch sat on the edge of the Arizona Territory, far from the nearest town, far from neighbors, far from anyone who could claim to know him. The land stretched wide and dry, dotted with dusty hills, mesquite trees, and the occasional patch of desert flowers that survived against all odds. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, turning the earth into a cracked golden plain, and the nights were just as harsh, with winds that whipped cold through the canyons and rattled the wooden shutters of his small home. John liked it this way. The world felt simpler out here, without the noise of towns or the constant worry about other people's problems. His days were predictable, and in their predictability, he found peace. John's life followed a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with checking the fences, making sure no cattle had wandered into the dry creek beds or been taken by coyotes during the night. He would walk the dusty paths, leaning on his weathered wooden staff, eyes sharp for any movement in the distance. Afterward, he tended to the cattle, feeding the animals, making sure the water troughs were full, and repairing anything that had broken under the unforgiving sun. His meals were simple: beans, bread, and sometimes a bit of dried meat, but they were enough for him. Evenings were spent sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon as the sky painted itself in colors he could never quite name, listening to the distant cries of coyotes and the rustle of the desert grasses. It was on one of these evenings, as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, that John noticed something unusual. He had been walking along a familiar path near a dry creek bed, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble, when movement caught his attention. At first he thought it might be an animal, a coyote or perhaps a stray calf, but as he drew closer, the movement became clearer, and his heart skipped a beat. Lying beneath the shade of a lone mesquite tree was a small figure, a child. The boy was thin to the point of fragility, his clothes tattered and coated in dust. He was barely moving, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The sight of the boy, alone and abandoned in the harsh desert, struck John with a force he had not felt in years. John's first instinct was caution. The territory was known for conflicts between settlers and Apache bands, and he had no desire to bring danger onto his land. But as he knelt beside the child, examining him more closely, another feeling took over: compassion. The boy's eyes were sunken and hollow, a faint trace of life flickering in their depths. He looked up at John with a weak, uncertain gaze, as if unsure whether he should trust this stranger who had appeared from nowhere. John's heart tightened. He had never had children of his own. His life had been one of solitude and labor, of long days and longer nights. Yet in that moment he felt a responsibility he could not ignore. He lifted the boy carefully, feeling how light and fragile he was, and carried him back to his ranch. The journey back was slow. The boy was too weak to walk, and the desert was unforgiving even in the fading light. Every step John took, he imagined what might have happened to leave a child alone out here. Had he wandered away from his family? Had something worse befallen them? The questions pressed on his mind, but there were no answers, only the urgent need to get the boy to safety. By the time they reached the small cabin that John called home, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving the sky painted with streaks of purple and red. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds the soft rustle of the wind and the boy's faint, uneven breathing. Inside the cabin, John laid the boy gently on a cot he had prepared with an old blanket. He fetched water in a small tin cup and offered it to the boy, who drank slowly, hesitantly. John had little food to offer: some bread, a few beans, and a small piece of dried meat, but he knew it would have to be enough for now. The boy ate with careful movements, as if unused to kindness or sustenance. John watched him closely, noting every shiver, every sigh, every twitch of discomfort. It was clear that the child had been through much more than anyone should endure, yet there was a quiet strength in him, a small spark that refused to die. That night, John sat by the fire, the boy sleeping fitfully on the cot. He listened to the soft crackle of the flames and the distant howls of coyotes, thinking about what had brought this child into his life. He thought of the stories he had heard of the Apache people, of their struggles and resilience, and wondered if this boy's family might be out there somewhere, searching desperately. He thought about his own life, so solitary, and realized that in one moment, everything had changed. The boy's presence brought a strange warmth to the cabin, a reminder that life, even in its harshest forms, could still surprise a man. Over the next few hours, John reflected on what he would do in the coming days. He needed to nurse the child back to health, of course, but he also knew he had to be careful. The desert was not forgiving to the weak, and the world beyond his ranch could be even harsher. Yet he could not turn away. He could not leave a child to fend for himself in a place where danger lurked in every shadow. As the fire dwindled to glowing embers, John resolved that he would do everything in his power to protect this boy, to give him a chance to survive, and perhaps even to thrive. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with questions and risks, but for the first time in years, John felt a sense of purpose beyond the routine of his lonely life. Morning came slowly, with the soft pink light spilling over the desert hills. The boy stirred, stretching weakly and blinking at the new light. John was already awake, preparing a small breakfast. Watching the boy's cautious movements, there was a sense of fragile trust beginning to grow between them, unspoken but palpable. John spoke softly, telling the boy that he was safe now, that he would not be left alone. The boy's eyes flickered with something that could have been hope, or perhaps curiosity. John did not know yet how this encounter would shape their lives, but he sensed that this small, starving child had come into his life for a reason, and that reason was beginning to reveal itself in quiet, powerful ways. By the end of the first day, John realized that the simple act of saving this child had already changed him. His once predictable solitary life was now filled with a new kind of responsibility, a challenge that was both daunting and deeply rewarding. He watched the boy eat, drink, and eventually rest again, and felt a strange sense of pride and connection. The desert around them remained harsh and silent, but inside the small cabin, there was a spark of life, a beginning of a story that neither of them could yet fully understand. John knew that whatever came next, the boy's survival and their bond would depend on courage, patience, and perhaps a touch of fate. Days passed slowly on John McAllister's ranch, but each day brought new challenges. The boy, still weak from his time in the desert, made small but steady progress. He could sit up longer, eat a little more, and even manage a few steps around the cabin with John nearby. Yet, despite these small improvements, there was an air of tension that John could not ignore. The desert was not forgiving, and neither was the world beyond his property. He had grown up knowing that help was scarce, that dangers often appeared without warning, and that survival required careful attention and constant vigilance. With a child now depending on him, John felt this responsibility more acutely than ever. John tried to communicate with the boy, asking his name and where he had come from, but the child remained silent. He would occasionally whisper a word or two in Apache, his voice so soft that John could barely understand. The rancher did his best to mimic the sounds, trying to show the boy that he meant no harm. He realized that trust would take time, and he had to be patient. For now, his main concern was keeping the boy alive and safe. Each meal was carefully prepared and offered slowly, each blanket adjusted to ensure warmth at night, and every day John monitored him closely for signs of illness or fatigue. It was a quiet struggle, but a struggle John was determined to endure. At the same time, John's mind was never at rest. He could not stop thinking about the boy's family. The desert was vast, and there was a chance that they were searching for him, calling his name in the empty expanses, hoping against hope that he had survived. Yet, days passed with no sign of anyone. John noticed footprints around the edges of his property, small and careful, leading to and from the distant hills. At first he had thought it might be an animal, but as he examined them more closely, he realized they were human, likely from someone watching, cautious and wary. He could not tell whether they were friends or foes. Each night as he sat by the fire, John's mind raced with possibilities. Who had left these tracks? Were they searching for the boy, or were they a threat that might bring trouble to his door? The boy, for his part, was beginning to show glimpses of curiosity and understanding. He would watch John as he worked around the ranch, sometimes mimicking small actions like sweeping the porch or arranging firewood. He asked questions in his own language, pointing to objects and waiting for a response. John did his best to explain, showing him how to handle simple chores, how to carry water without spilling, and how to identify safe plants near the creek. The boy's intelligence and quick learning surprised John. Despite his frail appearance, there was a quiet resilience in him that reminded John of the desert itself, tough, enduring, and quietly persistent. In teaching the boy, John found a sense of purpose that had long been absent from his solitary life. As the fourth day approached, John noticed subtle changes in the boy's behavior. He seemed more alert, more aware of his surroundings, but there was still a lingering fear in his eyes. At night, he would sometimes wake suddenly, looking toward the window or the door as if expecting danger to appear. John would comfort him, whispering that he was safe, that no harm would come while he was there. But John knew the world outside the ranch could be cruel. Conflicts between settlers and Apache tribes were well known in the territory, and even well-meaning individuals could find themselves in dangerous situations. He had to be ready for anything, both to protect the boy and to maintain the fragile trust that was slowly building between them. During those days, John also began to reflect on the larger world beyond his property. He thought about the Apache people, their struggles, and their resilience in the face of hardship. Stories he had heard from travelers and other settlers spoke of both conflict and kindness, of families separated by misfortune, and of children who had survived against impossible odds. He realized that the boy before him was not just an individual in need. He represented a culture and a history that had endured the harshest conditions imaginable. This awareness deepened John's commitment to help him. It was no longer just about survival. It was about respect, compassion, and the hope that the boy could one day return to his family. Despite his caution, John could not help but form an emotional bond with the child. He began to see the boy not merely as a person to protect, but as a companion who brought warmth and life to the ranch. Simple moments, a shared meal, a quiet laugh, a small game, became precious in ways John had never experienced. The boy's presence reminded him of the importance of connection, of the impact one life could have on another. John knew that the coming days would be crucial. The boy was getting stronger, but the question of what would happen next remained uncertain. Would his family find him? Would danger arrive in some unexpected form? The anticipation weighed heavily on John's mind, but it also fueled his determination to see this through. One afternoon, as John tended to the cattle, he noticed more distinct signs that someone had been nearby. Small footprints, barely noticeable in the dry soil, led close to the edge of his property and then disappeared into the hills. He crouched to examine them, trying to determine their origin. They were human, that much was certain, but their size suggested they were not from a child. The careful spacing indicated someone moving cautiously, watching, waiting. John's instincts told him this could be the boy's family, and he hoped, desperately, that it was. Yet he remained wary. The desert was full of unknowns, and he had to be prepared for any outcome. Throughout these days, John also struggled with his own emotions. Loneliness, which had once been his comfort, now felt heavier. The presence of the boy highlighted the quiet ache of a life lived without family, without companionship. He found himself talking aloud, explaining what he was doing, telling stories from his past, sharing thoughts that had long been kept to himself. The boy listened intently, occasionally responding in gestures or soft words. In these exchanges, John realized that both of them were learning from each other. The boy was learning survival skills, language, and trust, while John was rediscovering empathy, patience, and the simple joy of caring for another human being. By the fourth day, the boy's health had improved noticeably. His cheeks were no longer sunken, his eyes brighter, and his small frame showing signs of regained strength. Yet John knew that the danger had not passed. The desert was still vast, still unpredictable, and the question of the boy's family or possible enemies lingered in every shadow. He continued to watch the horizon, listen for distant sounds, and prepare for whatever might come. He felt a growing sense of anticipation, a quiet tension that something significant was about to happen. And in his heart he hoped that when that moment arrived, it would be a moment of reunion, not of loss. As evening fell on the fourth day, John sat by the fire, the boy resting beside him. The flames danced in the cabin, casting long shadows, and the desert outside seemed calm, almost peaceful. But John knew better. He had lived in this land long enough to understand that appearances could be deceiving. He remained alert, listening for any unusual sounds, feeling every gust of wind as it passed through the open windows. Yet, despite the tension, there was a sense of quiet triumph. The boy had survived 4 days alone. He had regained strength under John's care, and a bond had formed between them that could not easily be broken. John felt both relief and anticipation, knowing that soon the next chapter of their story would begin. By the morning of the 5th day, the boy was noticeably stronger. He moved around the cabin with more confidence, even helping John with small chores. The simple routine of daily life, fetching water, tending to the animals, and sweeping the porch, brought both comfort and a growing sense of companionship. John watched him carefully, noting every small action, every curious glance, and every faint smile. It was clear that the boy had begun to trust him. Yet there was still a lingering fear in his eyes, as if he carried memories of the harsh desert days or of events that had separated him from his family. John knew that trust, once broken, could not be rebuilt in an instant, and he treated the boy's caution with patience and care. John spent hours teaching the boy how to manage simple tasks around the ranch. He showed him how to carry a bucket of water without spilling it, how to feed the chickens, and how to stack firewood efficiently. The boy absorbed the instructions quickly, though sometimes he would pause, his small hands trembling as he tried to imitate John's movements. These moments reminded John of the fragility of life and how easily it could be disrupted. Yet he was amazed at the boy's resilience. Despite the hardships he had faced alone in the desert, he approached every new task with determination. John realized that the child's survival instincts were as strong as the desert wind, quiet but unyielding. The ranch, which had always been a place of quiet solitude for John, now buzzed with a subtle energy. The boy's laughter, though soft and rare, filled the empty spaces of the cabin and the yard. Even small victories, like successfully carrying a bucket without spilling or catching a stray chicken, were celebrated with a smile or a gentle clap from John. The bond between them grew stronger each day. John found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, telling the boys stories about the land, about the animals, and about the small joys he had experienced as a young man. Though the boy could not always respond with words, his eyes and gestures conveyed understanding and appreciation, and this was enough for John. Yet, amid the growing sense of normalcy, the footprints he had noticed days earlier still haunted him. He kept a careful watch over the boundaries of his ranch, alert to any unusual sounds or movement. He feared that someone might arrive, either searching for the boy or with less honorable intentions. At night, he would sit by the fire, listening intently for distant hoofbeats, the rustle of bushes, or the low growl of coyotes. Every shadow seemed to hold a possibility, every gust of wind a warning. He knew that while the boy was gaining strength, danger was never far away in the desert, and preparedness was essential. As they continued to spend time together, John also noticed changes in the boy's behavior that spoke to his emotional recovery. He would look at John with recognition, even reaching out to touch his hand or offer a small gesture of trust. He began to explore the ranch with more confidence, sometimes wandering toward the animals or the creek, always under John's watchful eye. He was learning not just survival skills, but also the quiet rules of human interaction, the give and take, the gestures that communicate trust, and the way to observe without fear. John felt a deep sense of satisfaction watching this growth, knowing that he had played a part in nurturing both the boy's body and his spirit. Despite the progress, the boy remained cautious. There were moments when he would freeze, eyes darting toward the horizon or toward the edges of the ranch, as if sensing something unseen. John understood that these reactions were normal. The boy had survived the desert alone, and the memory of isolation was not easily erased. John approached these moments with care, speaking softly, offering reassurance, and allowing the boy to regain his composure at his own pace. Through these small acts of patience and kindness, the bond between them continued to strengthen, built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of survival in a harsh, unforgiving land. John also reflected on the lessons he was learning from the boy. Living alone for so many years, he had grown accustomed to silence, to routine, and to a life measured only by the passage of days. The boy's presence reminded him of the importance of connection, of shared experience, and of the impact one life could have on another. He realized that life, even in its harshest forms, was not meant to be faced entirely alone. The boy's trust, fragile yet growing, showed John that compassion and care could create bonds that even the most solitary life could not deny. As the day wore on, John began to feel a sense of anticipation. He knew, instinctively, that the boy's family might soon appear. The footprints in the hills, the quiet signs of observation, all suggested that someone was searching. Yet, he also knew that no matter who arrived, the boy's safety was his responsibility until that moment came. The uncertainty hung over him, a constant reminder that the desert could bring both hope and danger in equal measure. John prepared for the possibility of visitors, ensuring that the boy remained close and safe while he himself stayed alert, ready to respond to any situation. In the quiet moments of the afternoon, John and the boy shared more personal experiences. He pointed out the different types of plants near the creek, explaining which were safe to touch and which could cause harm. He showed the boy the patterns of animal tracks in the sand, teaching him how to recognize signs of life and movement in the desert. The boy listened intently, asking questions in his soft, simple words, and John answered with patience and clarity. It was a slow, careful exchange, but each lesson learned was a step toward independence and resilience. John felt proud of the boy's progress, but he also knew that the lessons of the desert were only part of the preparation for what lay ahead. As evening fell, John felt a mix of relief and unease. The day had gone well. The boy was healthier, more confident, and more trusting, but the sense of anticipation remained. The desert night was quiet, but John's instincts told him that something was about to change. He sat by the fire, the boy resting nearby, and thought about the journey that had brought them together. The boy's survival had required courage, resilience, and a touch of luck, but it had also required John's care and attention. Together they had faced the uncertainty of the desert, and together they had survived. The bond between them had grown stronger, rooted in shared experience and mutual dependence, and John knew that the coming days would test both their courage and their trust. By the end of the day, John understood that this chapter of their story was far from over. The boy had regained strength, but the desert and the world beyond remained unpredictable. The footprints in the hills, the lingering signs of observation, all indicated that someone was approaching, someone who could bring answers, danger, or both. John's mind was focused, alert, and ready. He knew that whatever happened next, the bond he had formed with the boy would guide his actions. He had nurtured, protected, and taught him, and now he would need all his courage and skill to ensure that this fragile trust and newfound connection were not lost. In the quiet of the desert night, John felt a sense of resolve. He would face whatever came, for the boy's sake and for the hope that their story, though uncertain, would continue. As the fifth day drew to a close, John McAllister felt a strange mix of hope and unease. The boy had grown stronger with each passing hour, his small steps steadier, his eyes brighter, and his spirit slowly returning after days of fear and hunger. Yet, John could not shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The footprints he had noticed in the hills and the distant signs of observation suggested that they were not alone. Someone was out there, moving carefully through the desert, and John knew instinctively that the moment of truth was near. That evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange and the first stars began to appear, John sat with the boy near the fire. The boy's small hands clutched a piece of bread, his eyes following every movement John made as he stirred the embers. The ranch, usually quiet and solitary, now felt full of anticipation. Every rustle of the wind, every crackle of the fire seemed amplified, carrying with it the possibility of arrival. John kept a steady gaze on the horizon, watching the distant hills for any sign of movement, while the boy sat close, his trust in John evident in the way he leaned slightly toward him. Suddenly, movement appeared at the edge of the property. 3 figures emerged from the dim light of the desert, moving cautiously and deliberately. John's heart tightened. He could see immediately that they were women, their traditional clothing marked with the patterns of their Apache heritage. They stopped a short distance from the cabin, their eyes scanning the area, wary and alert. The boy stiffened, retreating slightly behind John, his small body trembling with a mixture of fear and recognition. John instinctively stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He did not speak, understanding that the first impression would set the tone for whatever was about to unfold. For a moment, there was only silence. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the wind still, as the 3 women observed the scene before them. Their expressions were a mixture of caution, concern, and hope. John could feel their eyes on the boy, the way they searched his face and body for signs of harm or illness. He realized that they were family, or at least guardians, and that their arrival could bring answers to the questions that had haunted him since he found the boy. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees, signaling that he meant no harm. The boy, sensing John's calm, stayed close, though he still peeked over John's shoulder with wide, uncertain eyes. The women took a few steps closer, their movements careful and deliberate. One of them spoke softly in Apache, her words flowing like a gentle river, carrying meaning and emotion that John could not fully understand. The boy's eyes widened, and he whispered something in response, his voice filled with recognition and relief. John listened, sensing the shift in the air. The tension that had gripped him for days began to ease slightly, replaced by a deep sense of connection and understanding. He could see that the women's primary concern was the boy's well-being, just as his had been. There was no hostility, only cautious hope and the weight of unspoken questions. John carefully stepped aside, giving the women space to approach the boy. They moved slowly, their hands extended in gestures of reassurance and care. The boy hesitated for a moment, torn between the familiarity of John's protection and the pull of his family. Then, with a small, tentative step, he reached toward them. One of the women gently took his hand, holding it softly while she examined him. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, searched his face, checking for signs of injury or distress. The boy's small body relaxed slightly under her touch, and John felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had feared this moment, unsure of how the women would react, but their gentle approach brought a sense of peace. The women spoke again, their words flowing quickly and quietly. The boy responded in kind, his voice soft but eager. John watched, fascinated, as the exchange unfolded. Though he could not understand the language, the emotions were clear: relief, gratitude, and cautious joy. The boy's family had found him, and he had survived the desert with the care and guidance of a man who had become his protector. John felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that his efforts had ensured the boy's survival. The connection between them, though temporary in this moment, was profound and life-changing for all involved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, the women prepared to leave. They had ensured that the boy was strong enough to return with them, and now their task was to guide him safely back to his people. John knelt by the fire, speaking softly to the boy, offering words of reassurance and encouragement. The boy looked up at him, eyes shining with gratitude and affection. He reached out and touched John's hand, a silent gesture of thanks and farewell. John's heart ached, knowing that this moment marked the end of a brief but intense chapter in their lives. The women guided the boy toward the hills, moving carefully to ensure his safety. John watched from the porch, the firelight flickering across his face as they disappeared into the desert. He felt a mix of emotions: relief that the boy was safe, pride in the bond they had formed, and a quiet sorrow at the thought of their separation. Yet he also knew that he had done what was right, that he had given the boy a chance to survive and reunite with his family. The desert, vast and unforgiving, now seemed less lonely, filled with the memory of courage, compassion, and human connection. After the women and the boy were gone, John remained on the porch long into the night. The desert was quiet again, the wind softly rustling through the mesquite trees. He thought about the past few days, the discovery of the boy, the care he had provided, and the bond that had grown between them. He reflected on the lessons he had learned about patience, trust, and the power of kindness. The experience had changed him, reminding him that even in the harshest environments, compassion could create connections that endure. He knew that life on the ranch would continue, but he would carry the memory of these days and the boy he had saved in his heart forever. John also thought about the resilience of the Apache people. He had seen it in the boy's strength, in the cautious determination of the women, and in the quiet ways they navigated the desert. Their courage, their care for family, and their ability to survive against all odds left a deep impression on him. He realized that survival was not just about physical strength, but about community, trust, and the willingness to protect those who are vulnerable. The boy's journey had taught him this lesson in a way that no story or history book ever could. As dawn approached, John finally went inside the cabin, exhausted but filled with a sense of fulfillment. The fire had burned low, casting soft embers across the floor, and the quiet of the night seemed to wrap around him like a comforting blanket. He knew that the boy was now on the path to safety, reunited with his family, and that his efforts had made a difference. Yet he also knew that the memory of these days, the bond they had shared, and the lessons learned would remain with him forever. The desert had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately rewarded him with the knowledge that compassion and courage can bridge even the widest gaps. Throughout the following days, John reflected on what had happened. He thought about the boy's frightened eyes when he first found him, the hesitant trust that grew with each small act of care, and the moment when the women finally arrived. Each memory was vivid and powerful, a reminder of the fragility and strength of life. He realized that these experiences had changed him in ways he could not have imagined. The desert, once a place of solitude and routine, had become a place of learning, growth, and human connection. He felt gratitude for the opportunity to have made a difference, and he knew that the story of the boy would remain with him as a guiding light in the years to come. After the boy had left with the 3 Apache women, John McAllister felt an emptiness that was strange and unfamiliar. The cabin, once alive with the soft sounds of his small companion, now felt quiet and still. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the desert night stretched endlessly outside, calm but vast. John walked slowly across the porch, looking out toward the horizon where the boy and his family had disappeared. Even though he knew he had done the right thing by helping the child, the separation left a heavy feeling in his chest. For days he had been responsible for this fragile life, had shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments of trust, and now it was gone. Yet amid the sadness, there was also a deep sense of fulfillment. He had saved a life. He had made a difference, and that knowledge, though quiet, warmed him from within. In the following days, John found himself thinking constantly about the boy. He remembered the moment he had discovered him under the mesquite tree, the frail figure barely moving in the hot desert sun. He recalled the fear in the boy's eyes, the hunger that had made him weak, and the uncertainty that hung over him like a cloud. John remembered carrying him to the cabin, laying him on the cot, and offering water and food. Every step of the boy's recovery, every small sign of trust, every smile or gesture of recognition had become etched in John's memory. These thoughts brought both comfort and a quiet ache, for he realized how deeply he had grown attached to a child who was now gone. Though the days returned to their quiet rhythm, John could not help but feel changed. The ranch, once a place of simple solitude, now seemed richer because of the experience. He paid closer attention to the small things, the rustle of the wind in the mesquite trees, the patterns of animal tracks in the soil, and the distant cries of the desert birds. He understood that life, even in its harshest form, held moments of beauty and connection if one was willing to see them. The memory of the boy reminded him of the importance of compassion, patience, and courage. The simple act of helping another human being had brought him a deeper understanding of life than years of solitary living ever could. John also thought about the Apache women who had come for the boy. Their careful movements, their gentle words, and the way they had assessed the boy's health and safety had left a lasting impression on him. He understood that their caution was not mistrust, but care. They had acted with love, responsibility, and wisdom, ensuring that the boy could return safely to his people. John admired their resilience and the quiet strength that had carried them across the desert. The encounter had taught him about the power of community, the bonds of family, and the lengths people will go to protect those they care for. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As the days passed, John returned to his routine on the ranch, tending to the animals, checking the fences, and walking the familiar paths of his land. Yet, he did so with a new awareness. The world beyond the ranch no longer felt distant or irrelevant. He knew that every life was connected in ways that were sometimes invisible, and that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing the course of someone else's life in profound ways. The boy's survival, his reunion with his family, and the brief but meaningful connection they had shared had made John see his world differently. It was no longer just about the routine of survival. It was about understanding, empathy, and the quiet ways one life can touch another. John often sat on the porch at dusk, looking out over the desert and remembering the boy. He thought about the small hands that had reached out to him, the tentative trust in those bright eyes, and the laughter that had once filled the cabin. He thought about the courage it had taken for the boy to survive alone in the desert, and the patience it had taken for both of them to build a bond. These memories were bittersweet. They brought both warmth and a sense of longing, but they reminded John of the value of human connection, even fleeting moments of it. The boy had changed his life, leaving an imprint that no distance or time could erase. One morning, as John walked along the creek bed where he had first found the boy, he paused to look at the traces of life left behind. Small footprints in the sand, marks on the rocks, and signs of animals nearby reminded him of the fragile balance of life in the desert. He thought about the boy and his family, hoping that they had reached safety and would continue to thrive. John understood that the desert was both harsh and generous, teaching lessons through hardship, survival, and connection. He felt gratitude for having been part of this story, for having been able to protect a life in need, and for the lessons he had learned about courage, compassion, and trust. In the quiet moments of the afternoon, John reflected on the bond he had formed with the boy. It was not just a connection between two individuals. It was a bridge between worlds, cultures, and experiences. The boy had come from a life John could not fully understand, and yet, in the shared moments of survival and care, they had found common ground. The trust that had grown between them was a testament to the power of kindness and the human spirit. John realized that this brief chapter in his life, though temporary, had enriched him in ways that solitude never could. It had shown him the importance of being present, of caring deeply, and of recognizing the impact one life can have on another. John also thought about the future. He knew that life on the ranch would continue with its routines, challenges, and occasional solitude. But he also knew that he would carry the memory of the boy with him always. The experience had changed him, making him more aware, more compassionate, and more connected to the world around him. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that even in isolation, his actions could matter. The desert, once a place of simple survival, had become a place of learning, reflection, and connection. John knew that he had been fortunate to witness courage, resilience, and the power of human kindness up close. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, John sat on the porch with a quiet smile. He thought about the boy's journey, the reunion with his family, and the lessons learned from those few days of shared experience. He realized that even the briefest encounters could leave a lasting mark, shaping the way one sees the world and the people in it. The memory of the boy, his trust, and the care he had received would remain with John forever, a reminder that compassion and courage are the true measures of a life well lived. The desert, with all its beauty and danger, had taught him that even in the harshest conditions, human connection could flourish. John spent the evening reflecting on the boy's resilience. He remembered the fear in his eyes when first discovered, the tentative trust he had slowly offered, and the courage he had shown in facing both hunger and fear. The boy had survived against the odds, not just because of John's care, but because of his own determination and inner strength. John admired this courage, understanding that true resilience comes from within, nurtured by trust, care, and the willingness to face life's challenges. He knew that the boy's journey would continue, and he felt proud to have been a part of it, even for a short time. In the days and weeks that followed, John returned to his routine with a deeper appreciation for life. Every sunrise, every rustle of the wind, and every small movement of the animals around the ranch reminded him of the lessons learned during those intense days with the boy. He knew that the experience had changed him permanently, making him more aware, compassionate, and resilient. The boy's presence, though brief, had left a mark on his heart, reminding him that even in solitude, life is enriched by the connections we make and the kindness we extend to others. John McAllister, the solitary rancher of the Arizona Territory, had discovered that even in the vast desert, one act of compassion could shine like a star, guiding both lives toward hope, courage, and understanding.